All right, open your Bibles, if you would, with me, please, to the book of Esther. The Old Testament book of Esther. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. And we're going to be in chapter 1. Esther, chapter 1. Okay, I'm going to need you to stay with me. I'm going to tie all of this together. And you're going to see when we get to the end how this ties together. The first half of this message, I'm going to be giving you some critical history in order for you to better understand the events that we're going to read in Esther chapter 1. This is going to be detailed. I'm going to try to do it in such a way that it'll not seem boring to you, because I know sometimes whenever you get into some history, some people kind of tend to go to sleep. I don't think you're going to go to sleep on this one, because the information I'm going to share with you is absolutely fascinating. And the way the secular history dovetails with biblical history, showing what God does through secular history and how He accomplishes His will for His people in spiritual history, I think is going to be a lesson that you're going to take with you today that is going to be something you probably have never heard before unless you've heard me talk about it, and probably you won't forget it. The book of Esther opens, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus," this is, wrong pronunciation. "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus," this is Ahasuerus, "which reigned from India even into Ethiopia, over 107 and 20 provinces, over 60 countries, 127 sub-provinces, under the reign of King Ahasuerus." In 491 BC, the Persian King Darius, this is the Darius of the book of Daniel, sent emissaries to all the Greek city-states demanding their submission to him. Having had a demonstration of his power the previous year, the majority of Greek cities duly obliged. In Athens, however, the ambassadors were put on trial and then executed. In Sparta, they were simply thrown down a well. This meant that Sparta was also now effectively at war with Persia. Darius, therefore, put together an amphibious task force in 490 BC, which attacked Naxos before receiving the submission of the other Cycladic islands. The task force then moved on to Eretria, which it besieged and destroyed. Finally, it moved to attack Athens, landing at the Bay of Marathon, where it was met by a heavily outnumbered Athenian army. At the ensuing Battle of Marathon, the Athenians won a remarkable victory, which resulted in the withdrawal of the Persian army back to Asia. Darius therefore began raising a huge new army, which he meant to completely subjugate Greece. However, in 486 BC, his Egyptian subjects revolted, indefinitely postponing any Greek expedition. Darius died while preparing to march on Egypt and the throne of Persia passed to his son Xerxes. With me so far? 5 of you are with me. Are the rest of you here? All right. Xerxes crushed the Egyptian revolt and very quickly restarted the preparations for the invasion of Greece and avenged his father's loss to the Greeks by leading a force of between 100 and 150,000 men, including the famous and fierce Immortals, against the nation of city-states. Since this was to be a full-scale invasion, it required long-term planning, stockpiling, and conscription. Xerxes decided that the Hellespont, that's the waterway between Asia Minor, Turkey, and Greece, which is only about a mile wide, would be bridged to allow his army to cross into Europe. This was a feat of exceptional ambition, which would have been beyond any contemporary state. By early 480 BC, the preparations were complete, and the army which Xerxes had mustered in Sardis marched towards Europe, crossing the Hellespont on 2 pontoon bridges. As the leaders of Greece argued over what to do, submit, fight, the Spartan king Leonidas took his personal guard of 300 men, along with 700 Thespians and a few hundred others, so we had a total of just over 1,000 men, to meet the advancing Persians, numbering between 100 and 150,000, at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. Many of you are aware of this battle. I'm going to give you some more information about it today. Before we get into the battle, let's talk a little bit about Spartan work culture, etc. The training of the Spartan warriors started when they were boys. They were sent to a military boarding school at the age of 7, where they formed a class with other boys their age. Their education emphasized physical, mental, and spiritual toughness and could be quite brutal. They were taught to endure hardship and were pitted against each other in fights by their instructors. At age 20, the men of Sparta moved into the barracks and became full-time soldiers. Even if they were married, which they were expected to do, they lived in the barracks. Military service lasted until the age of 40. Duty in the reserves lasted from 40 to 60 years of age. In desperate times, men as old as 65 could be called up to protect supplies. So basically, the Spartans began training to be soldiers at the age of 7. And they never stopped their entire life. They were soldiers their entire lives, as children, as teenagers, and as adults, and even as elderly men. Sparta was known for being the only Greek city without a city wall. A famous saying among Spartans was, "Our men are our walls." A Spartan typically had a bronze muscled breastplate, a helmet with cheek plates. They carried a bowl-shaped wood and bronze shield. It protected the warrior from chin to knee. The shield, just the shield, weighed almost 30 pounds. In Spartan military culture, defeat was not acceptable. Come home with this shield or upon it was their motto. Meaning, if you can't come home victorious, then come home dead. They also wore a scarlet cape to represent them as Spartans, though the cape was never worn in combat. Their primary weapon was a spear around 7 to 9 feet in length. The spear had a leaf-shaped spearhead on the business end and a spike on the other end. The spike, called a lizard killer, that's what they called it, could be used to stand the spear up in planting it in the ground, or it could be used to finish off fallen enemies that the formation is moving over. Additionally, if the spearhead broke off the spear could then be spun around and the spike could be used in its place. Spartan warriors also carried a short sword to be used as a secondary weapon in the crush of battle when only a short weapon could be used effectively. The blade of the sword was typically 2 feet long. The blade was shaped like a long leaf and could be used for slashing. However, they were usually used for stabbing. The Spartans used an even shorter sword, the blade measuring only 1 foot to 1.5 feet long, making it even easier to use in tight places. These short swords could be used to stab at the unprotected groin, armpit, and throat of an enemy. A little background on Spartan culture, Spartan soldiering, Spartan weaponry. The Battle of Thermopylae, one of the greatest battles in all of human history, would now take place over the next 7 days. The narrow pass at Thermopylae had a huge mountain range on one side and the Aegean Sea on the other side. At its narrowest point, it was only 20 yards wide. That was the point that King Leonidas and his Spartans chose to defend. Again, they were up against a force of between 100 and 150,000 Persians, including the famous immortals. They had the 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and a few others. Xerxes demanded that the Greeks lay down their arms. Leonidas responded with the now famous Molan Labe, which means come and take them. The Lord has allowed me to be featured in 14 full-length documentary films. One of them is called Molan Labe. If you have not seen this film, I highly encourage you to get it. We have it in our store online at the chuckbaldwinlive.com website. Again, Molan Labe. Subtitle, How the Second Amendment Guarantees America's Freedom. And I'm featured along with Ron Paul, Pat Buchanan, Ed Vieira, and several others. Also, my son Tim, who is a constitutional attorney, he and I collaborated on a book entitled To Keep or Not to Keep, Why Christians Should Not Give Up Their Guns. If you have not read this book, I strongly encourage you to get it. This is also on our store online. Molan Labe. The fight was engaged. The Persians assaulted again and again and again. Each time, those 300 Spartans defeated their assailants, killing between 20 and 25,000 Persian soldiers, with only a handful of casualties among the Spartans. Can you imagine? 300 men killed 20 to 25,000 Persian troops. The Persians were unable to penetrate the Spartan defense. But a fellow Greek betrayed his countrymen. There's a traitor in every crowd. A fellow Greek betrayed his countrymen and showed the Persians a secret path around the mountain that would bring them behind the Spartan warriors. When King Leonidas realized that this was happening, he dismissed everyone, that would be the Thespians and the others that were with him, except his 300 Spartans who stayed at their position, even though they knew they were being surrounded. With no advantage now to holding their position, they charged the enemy, inflicting many of the deaths already mentioned in the final hours of fighting. Many of those 25,000 deaths occurred as the Spartans were now leaving their position and charging into this army of over 100,000 men. In this part of the battle, King Leonidas was killed. The Persians tried 4 times to seize his body, but the Spartans fought them off. Finally, as the remaining Spartans died, the Persians claimed the body. Xerxes had him beheaded and his body crucified, and he buried the 300 Spartan warriors, lest his people would see just how few men there were that inflicted such great devastation upon the Persian army. The death of the 300 Spartans united the Greek cities, and the Athenian politician and general Themistocles convinced the Athenians to give him the authority to lead Greek naval forces against the Persians. This brings us to the second part of the battle, which was the sea battle. Themistocles, who became known by historians as, quote, the architect of the greatest sea battle ever fought, close quote, led a Greek fleet of around 300 ships against a Persian fleet of 1,200 ships in the Battle of Salamis, named after an island off the Greek coast. The Persians were up all night the day before the actual battle, trying to find the Greek navy in the open waters. The next morning, the Persian fleet left the open waters and entered the Straits of Salamis. This was a huge tactical mistake for the Persians and a huge tactical advantage for the Greeks. Only about 100 Persian ships could enter the straits at a time. In the straits, the smaller, more agile Greek fleet rammed and sunk the Persian ships. The ships that did not sink were immobilized by the rammings, boarded and destroyed by superior hand-to-hand fighting by the Greeks. The famous Persian immortals who had survived the Battle of Thermopylae were slaughtered to a man. And all of the Persian troops who survived the sea battle by swimming to shore, most of the Persians knew nothing about swimming and drowned, but the ones who made it to shore were killed by Greeks who were waiting for them on land. There was divine providence at work in this battle as well, evidenced by the fact that the Persian ships tried to retreat from the straits when they realized the disadvantage they were in. But a strong wind came up, which did not allow them to leave the straits. The Greek navy suffered the loss of around 40 ships, while the Persian navy lost over 300. The death toll of the battle is estimated at 235,000 dead, the vast majority of whom were Persians. Xerxes, sitting ashore upon his golden throne, witnessed the horror. He remarked that Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, a Greek city-state, was the only general to show any productive bravery, ramming and destroying 9 Athenian ships. Artaxerxes said this, "My female general has become a man, and my male generals have all become women." The subsequent Greek victory at the Battle of Salamis left much of the Persian Empire's navy destroyed, and Xerxes was forced to retreat back to Asia, leaving his army in Greece under Mardonius, who was to meet the Greeks in battle one last time. The Spartans assembled at full strength and led an army that defeated the Persians decisively at the Battle of Plataea, ending the Greco-Persian War, and with it the expansion of the Persian Empire into Europe. Of course, later Alexander the Great would defeat the Persians once and for all. Themistocles, along with Spartan King Leonidas, were no doubt the two men most responsible for the deliverance of Greece from the invading Persians. But Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with Themistocles, did more than save Greece. They saved Western civilization. Say, Chuck, well, that's a nice story. What's that got to do with the book of Esther? It has everything to do with the book of Esther, because King Ahasuerus, in verse 1, is in fact King Xerxes, the king we just talked about. Ahasuerus is the Hebrew word. Xerxes is the Greek word. This is Xerxes that we're reading about in Esther chapter 1. The events that we're going to read took place before Xerxes invaded or tried to invade Greece. This happened before Xerxes invaded Greece. And it's significant to the entire story. And I'm going to tell you at the end of its greater significance. Let's begin reading. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, that is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. So this party went on for 180 days. And when those days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto the great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So he's culminating this 180-day party by having this 7-day feast, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords and fine linens and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. Very elaborate display of wealth and power. Medo-Persia was the power, it was the empire of that day. It was the most powerful government in the world at that time, and no doubt the richest. So all of this ostentatiousness was a purposeful display of the power and the grandeur and the wealth of the Persian Empire. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold. Can you imagine drinking out of gold cups? The vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Now, right here, let me just pause. Persian law promoted moderation in all things, especially when it came to the consumption of alcohol. Believe it or not, the Persian people were not regarded as being wine bibbers and drunkards. They believed in moderation and they practiced moderation, and usually whenever there would be a public party such as this, there would be commands given toward moderation. In other words, limiting what everyone could drink. But Xerxes, in this particular celebration, he threw that Persian custom out the window, and he made a law. When you're king, you can just speak a law into existence. That's why in America, we're not supposed to have a king, and we don't want a king in this country. So he spoke a law basically circumventing the custom of Persia, and basically said to all of the attendees, all these princes and these government officials, drink as much as you want. No limit. And so you can imagine 180 days of this, of constant eating and drinking and partying. Eating, drinking, and partying for 180 days. What's that? Almost 6 months. Half a year of nothing but eating and drinking and partying. And with no limit to what could be consumed, there's no question these men, including Xerxes, were probably drunk more of that period of time than they were sober. That's what we're reading. Verse 9. Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. This was a separate, completely distinct and separate activity away from Xerxes' party. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry, in other words, he was stoned. When the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that were served in the presence of Ahasuerus or Xerxes, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. So, with all of this consumption of alcohol, this king, Xerxes, commands that his queen, Vashti, come before this drunken mob and expose herself. That was the command. Verse 12. But the queen Vashti refused to come to the king's commandment. She refused to come to the king's commandment. She said, "Not in your life, pal, am I going to come and stand in front of your drunken bum friends and expose myself to them. I don't care who you are. Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown, these are Scottish theologians that wrote in the 1800s. This is 1871 when they wrote this. The refusal of Vashti to obey an order which required her to make an indecent exposure of herself before a company of drunken revelers was becoming both the modesty of her sex and her rank as a queen. For according to Persian custom, the queen, even more than the wives of other men, was secluded from the public gaze. Had not the king's blood been heated with wine, or his reason overpowered by force of offended pride, he would have perceived that his own honor, as well as hers, was consulted by her dignified conduct. In other words, by refusing to do this act of debauchery, she was not only honoring herself as a woman and wife, as a queen, but she was also honoring her husband by not subjecting his throne to such a spectacle. I'm telling you, Vashti is one of the most courageous and honorable women of the entire Old Testament. Let's keep reading. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. He should have been repentant and embarrassed when he realized how dignified and how true his wife was to these virtuous things, and should have been convicted of his own sin. And he should have crawled on his knees to Vashti and asked for forgiveness, is what he should have done. But instead, he became angry in his own pride. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. Skip verse 14, because I don't want to pronounce all those names. Verse 15, what shall we do unto the Queen Vashti according to law? Because she has not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Azeris. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands. Well, if they acted in this piggish manner, they deserved to be despised. It shall be reported the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the dead of the queen, they shall arise to much contempt and wrath. In other words, when word gets out that the queen has denied the king's command in this regard, all of the other women in the kingdom are going to be encouraged to not allow themselves to be treated like animals. And we won't have the control over them that we want to have. We want to dominate them. We want to control. We want them to do anything we tell them to do. I know some so-called Christian men that have that same piggish attitude about their wives. That was the argument that they made. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it not be allowed that not be altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all the empire, for it is great, all the wives shall come to their husbands' honor, both to great and small. And the saying pleased the king, and the princes and the king did according to the word of Memucan, for he sent letters unto all the king provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and it should be published according to the language of every people. Vashti was the first woman of note or distinction to stand up for the independent dignity of women throughout the world. Her actions led to the ascension of Queen Esther, and no doubt her example gave Esther the courage to do what she did in risking her life to save the children of Israel. Plus, there is no doubt that Vashti's courage and conviction added God's judgment on Xerxes at the battles in Greece that I rehearsed during the first half of this address. God fights on behalf of those who suffer for righteousness' sake. There is no doubt that a part of the horrific defeat that Xerxes met in Greece had to do with the way Xerxes treated his queen. And God honored her courage and conviction to stand and face the consequences of saying no to a tyrant. But the story is not over. Enter King Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes. Nehemiah was permitted by the Persian king Artaxerxes, son of Xerxes, to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city wall. Read that in the book of Nehemiah. The king in Nehemiah is Artaxerxes, son of Xerxes, that we find in Esther. King Artaxerxes, though a Persian, believed in freedom of religion. Listen, he believed in freedom of religion and allowed people to express their faith without state interference. Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes. This is why he allowed Nehemiah to take the remnant of the children of Israel back to Jerusalem to build the walls of Jerusalem. This is Artaxerxes. This is the grandson of King Darius from the book of Daniel, son of King Xerxes from Esther, who had lost over 20,000 men to the 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae, and who had lost the naval battle at Salamis to the Athenians, who were led by General Themistocles. This is the son of that same man. Leonidas was killed at Thermopylae, but after defeating the Persians, Greek aristocrats turned against Themistocles, who was of a common birth and was despised by the aristocracy of Greece. And the hero at the Battle of Salamis had to flee Greece for his own safety. He was the hero. He was one of the two men that saved Greece, humanly speaking, from the Persian army. Leonidas died in battle. Themistocles was banned from Greece by the aristocracy because he was a common birth, not good enough for them, and he had to flee Greece for his life. So much for Thanksgiving, so much for appreciation. Can you imagine? Artaxerxes, son of Xerxes, provided asylum to Themistocles and made him governor of a Persian state, Magnesia, where Themistocles lived for the rest of his life and died peacefully at an old age of natural causes. Can you believe this? Artaxerxes, whose father's army lost tens of thousands of men in the battles of Greece, gives refuge to one of the two men responsible for those Persian deaths, and not only gives him refuge in Persia, but also makes him a governor of a province in Persia, and allows this man to live to a ripe old age and die a natural death. Artaxerxes, son of Xerxes. You know, this makes you realize all the more how much of a skunk Xerxes really was. Think about it. Xerxes had Vashti as his queen. He got rid of her, and then who was his queen? Esther. Two godly women were the two queens in his kingdom. His son, Artaxerxes, was a remarkably honorable man who believed in freedom and liberty. Was his son. You say, what in the world happened to Xerxes? I don't know if we can figure that out. We could ask that of a lot of people that we know, don't we? Who are these people? They're surrounded with good people, good influences, good examples, and they're skunks. Mean, rotten, skunks, garbage, people that drag everybody they come in contact with down, people who have no self-worth whatsoever in this world, sons of Belial who do the work of the devil. Who are they? That's Xerxes. This is another point, caveat here that we need to understand. These Christian Zionists in our country today who have this hatred and bigotry in their hearts against the Persian people today, who just put all of that race into one category and treat them all like they are all despicable, violence-prone, murderous, jihadist, America-hating, Christian-hating. If I had my way, Pastor Baldwin, I'd send our bombers over to Iran. I would leave that entire country level with the sand and let nobody left. I'd do the same thing in Syria, do the same thing in Iraq. I'd do the same thing to all those Muslim countries. I'd just blow them off of the face of it. How many times have I heard that? From these loving Christian people. People are people. Our people are people. And you'll find, I don't care where you look, you will find good people and you'll find stinking rotten people. You will find honorable people and you'll find disgusting, despicable people. It doesn't matter what race you're dealing with. It doesn't matter what country you're dealing with, what nationality you're dealing with, what ethnicity you're dealing with. You will find good people and you will find bad people. I truly question, and I'm not God. God is the only one who knows the answer, so it's just for me a question. I truly question the salvation of these so-called Christian people who have such hatred and bigotry in their hearts that they could wipe out an entire race, an entire nation of people and claim to be doing a service for God. They themselves, though they wear a coat and a tie, and they drive a nice car, and they go to church, and they sit very smugly and piously in the pew, and people think that they're wonderful Christians. They themselves, with a heart of hatred and bigotry, are disgusting, despicable people. Artaxerxes was nothing like his father. Artaxerxes not only allowed Nehemiah to take the children of Israel to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls, but he gave Themistocles a home, made him a governor, and let him live the rest of his life in peace. This Artaxerxes was a good man. Story is not over. When America was young, just getting started, we were struggling through all the nuances of liberty. And some of the people who came from Europe and fled religious oppression, after coming to America and the early colonies, such as in Virginia, themselves became oppressors against other people of faith. They fled the Roman Church in Europe for religious liberty. But then they persecuted the Baptist congregations in Virginia in oppression. Preachers were jailed. Preachers were beaten who refused to submit to the doctrine of the Church of England. These kind of things were going on in the colonies of this new world, this new land of liberty. They traded one form of tyranny for another form of tyranny. I wish we could get our Christian brethren in the United States to understand. Tyranny is tyranny. It doesn't matter who the author of it is. When a Democrat is in the White House, I hear Christians and Republican conservatives all the time talking about Obama did, that's tyranny. What Obama did, that was tyranny. Obamacare, that's tyranny. Obama did this, that's tyranny. Clinton did this, that's tyranny. Tyranny, tyranny, tyranny. Hear it all the time. But as soon as a Republican goes in the White House, you never hear the word again. And when somebody says, well, you know what? Mr. Trump is doing exactly the same thing that Mr. Obama did. If it was tyranny when Obama did it, it's tyranny when Trump does it. And they go, oh, no, that's not tyranny. If we could only get them to understand that freedom has nothing to do with political parties. and has everything to do with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights upon which this country was formed. Shouldn't matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican or a Whig. If they violate the Constitution, we need to call them on it and stand for the truth of liberty in this land. Roger Williams was such a man. Roger Williams lived in Virginia. Roger Williams is the father of the Baptists in America. Roger Williams saw his fellow Baptists being persecuted by the Church of England. He saw his fellow preachers being imprisoned, beaten up on the street corners. So Roger Williams took his band of Baptists to Rhode Island. It wasn't called that then. But Roger Williams and his fellow Baptists founded the state of Rhode Island on the principle of religious liberty and the separation of church and state. And by the separation of church and state, he meant that the secular government should respect and stay out of the affairs of religion and the church. This doctrine, which was radical whenever Roger Williams was preaching it, was enshrined in the First Amendment of our Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution and became the cornerstone liberty of all of the liberties that we have in this country. Religious liberty and the separation of the church from the state, where the state is not allowed to interfere with the affairs of the church, was held sacrosanct from the days of Roger Williams and making its way into our constitutional First Amendment, freedom of religion. And may I say, this is also the doctrine that has been grossly violated over the entire United States for the past 3 months. That's right. With most pastors and Christians willingly surrendering this sacred doctrine in a state of fear. In a few days, June 11th, a week from Thursday, we are going to reprint the Freedom Documents. We print twice a year. The Freedom Documents is the greatest compilation of the great historical documents of our nation's history in one book anywhere in the world. There's not another book like this. This is the only one, and we're the ones that put it together. You will read, when you read this book, you will read the great documents from the hearts and minds of our founders relative to the subject of liberty, including religious liberty. As you read those men's words, the words that gave birth to the greatest free land to ever exist, and then wake up after reading it, lift up your eyes and look at the way our preachers, pastors, politicians, heads of state, etc., are treating the Constitution today. And it'll help you to realize how far we have slipped down the side of the hill toward tyranny. I want you to think of this. I'm going to try to say this without scaring you with my face, because I get very passionate about this kind of stuff. Think of it. 200 years of American blood protecting it. 2,000 years of blood in Western civilization purchasing it. Even going back to the courage of a Spartan king and a Persian queen thousands of years ago, given up in 3 months by America's pastors and Christians out of fear of a scam virus. Given up in 3 months. What thousands of years of courage and bloodshed have bought. This generation of pastors should crawl on their knees and find a spot that represents something holy and good and confess their cowardice to Queen Vashti and King Leonidas and Roger Williams and the great patriots of 1,000 years. Here's today's Patrick Henrys. Here's today's Patrick Henrys. Give me liberty or give me death, unless there's a virus with a 99% recovery rate, in which case, strip me of my freedoms, my job, my constitutional rights, and put me under house arrest. That's today's Patrick Henrys. The victories at Thermopylae and Salamis predicated the rise of Western civilization. It provided for the spread of Christianity throughout Europe and led to the founding of America and our free republican form of government. Think about it. It wouldn't have happened without the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis. Think of this. Queen Vashti. All we read about her is what we read here in this chapter. But this woman was instrumental in the temporal salvation of the children of Israel. She was instrumental in the destruction of the Persian Empire, the rise of Western civilization, the spread of the gospel, the rise of America, the great influence upon Roger Williams. Maybe I left it out. When Roger Williams articulated his separation of church and state religious liberty doctrine in Virginia and then in Rhode Island, he did so lauding the example of Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes was the inspiration for Roger Williams. That's why I say Queen Vashti was instrumental in the temporal salvation of the children of Israel, the destruction of the Persian Empire. She brought God's judgment upon Xerxes. You cannot persecute people who are standing for righteousness without angering God against you. These people that are doing evil to people who are taking positions of righteousness are invoking the wrath of God upon them. And that is undeniable. Xerxes reaped the judgment of God for several reasons, not the least of which the way he treated this wonderful, courageous woman, Queen Vashti. She was instrumental in the rise of America, the great influence upon Roger Williams and America's founders, and was a historical forerunner to our freedom and eternal salvation. Queen Vashti. We will never know. Let me bring this down to where we are. We will never know until we get to eternity the mighty results that were wrought through the godly courage and conviction of one faithful man and one faithful woman. One. Just one. One faithful man. One faithful woman. We will never know till we get to eternity the mighty works that God did as a result of that one man or that one woman. Therefore, Liberty Fellowship, both here and there, we must never surrender an opportunity that God gives us to courageously stand upon our convictions, regardless of what it may cost us. Because who knows what God will ultimately do with our sacrifice. Amen. To again quote one of my favorite historical quotations, John Quincy Adams, duty is ours, results are God's. In 2020, we are remembering Queen Vashti. Let's stand for a word of prayer.